Okay, so now we are going to learn the pharmacologic management um, or the drugs used for the treatment of heart failure. No? So a lot of these agents we have already encountered in the previous lectures on cardiovascular drugs. So heart failure is a grave disease. No? And the usual leading cause will be coronary artery disease as well as hypertension. Mm. There are two types of failure. One is systolic. Systolic failure, 50% of that is said to involve young, relatively younger individuals. And here you have a decrease in contractility. So you have to begin with an already weakened heart, you know, and it's a weak pump, and the ejection fraction is, of course, much reduced. Diastolic heart failure often affects older individuals. And here, you have reduced feeling pressure and reduced cardiac output that results due to a stiffening of the cardiac or the myocardium and inadequate relaxation of your chamber walls. So here, ejection fraction may or may not be preserved, but you do have reduced feeling and the cardiac output will eventually decrease. Now, unfortunately, the impairment in cardiac function in heart failure is often irreversible, and there is a progressive decline in the performance of the heart, you know. And so this is also because of uh, episodes of acute decompensation in the setting of chronic heart failure. You know? So our objectives of treatment will be to delay the progression of this disease, to improve the symptomatology of the patient, and the prompt and correct management of episodes of acute decompensation. And hopefully, we will improve uh, the prognosis for our patients. And uh, there are multiple reasons why uh, acute decompensation arises. No? So often, it's a combination of all these factors that will lead to such episodes. Now, for example, very common is failure of compliance with medication and diet, no? Especially salt restriction, no? Uh, and also fluid intake, no? Taking too much salt and fluid, and the illnesses such as serious infections like pneumonia, and of course, progressive um, escalation of underlying morbidities like coronary artery disease and hypertension. Now, heart failure is both systolic and diastolic heart failure are low output failures, meaning the cardiac output and the ejection fraction falls below normal. So, uh, acute heart failure, especially if associated with a myocardial infarction, is often a systolic type, you know, and the ejection fraction in such conditions will usually fall uh, to less than 45%. Uh, in other cases, there is a cardiac hypertrophy and the stiffening of the chamber walls. No? And this is when diastolic failure results because the heart um, becomes very stiff, so it does not stretch too much, no? In response to ventricular filling pressure. So, nalilimit yung ventricular filling, no? And here, the cardiac output is reduced, no, although the ejection fraction may still be within normal to begin with. No? In such setting of diastolic heart failure, your inotropic agents may play very little role in the management. Now, this particular flow chart will provide an overview of the pathophysiology of heart failure. No? So symptoms of heart failure will be tachycardia, shortness of breath, then your patient will show evidence of cardiomegaly and will have decreased exercise tolerance or easy fatigability. No? So there may or may not be um, signs of congestion or such as edema, no? Peripheral edema or pulmonary edema. No? Then the other accompanying symptoms will be a manifestation of the compensatory response of the body to decrease cardiac output. No? For example, you have extrinsic neurohormonal responses coming from stimulation of the sympathetic nervous outflow and, of course, activation of your renin, aldosterone, angiotensin aldosterone system. So in this condition, the baroreceptor reflex is reset to a lower sensitivity to arterial pressure. So even at normal blood pressure, the sensory input to the vasomotor center is lowered. No? So the CNS outflow increases, no? While the parasympathetic influence is blunted or reduced. So you have increase in cardiac force of contraction and an increase in heart rate, no? As well as an increase in vasomotor tone. No? Now, also the increase in vascular smooth muscle uh, tone or resistance is uh, uh, contributed to by the RAS, no? Because angiotensin 2 um, will eventually lead to, of course, vasoconstriction. And there's also a release of endothelin from the blood vessel endothelium. And endothelin is a potent vasoconstrictor. No? So the afterload is increased also, and this will further compromise cardiac output and ejection fraction. So you have what you call a vicious cycle as indicated in a diagram. No? So what is the response of the cardiac myocardium to the diminished uh, cardiac output? No? So the intrinsic response of the cardiac myocyte to the decrease in order for it to maintain, in order for the heart to maintain cardiac output is to undergo hypertrophy. No? So this can be beneficial at the start, but eventually it will result into detrimental effects. So this is what we call cardiac remodeling. No? So initially you have hypertrophy, but this will eventually escalate into ischemia. This will compromise diastolic feeling and eventually structural changes in the ventricles will um, appear. No? And this is what we call remodeling. So remodeling are the structural changes in the cardiac myocytes, and this will gradually lead into dilatation of the heart, no? The ventricular chambers, connective tissue proliferation, and abnormal myocytes that undergo early apoptosis or early cell death. No? Now, these are the determinants of cardiac performance and how they are affected and how they are changed in the setting of heart failure. No? In heart failure, you have an increase in preload. No? because of course, there's increased blood volume and venous return, and there's a resulting increase in myocardial oxygen demand because of the increase in filling pressure and increased fiber length. So how do you address increase in preload in heart failure? A very important non-pharmacologic adjunct will be salt restriction. And this will greatly enhance the effect of our diuretics. And then you can also give vasodilators such as nitroglycerin, which dilates your capacitance vessels, thereby reducing venous return. The afterload is also increased, no, because there's increased release of catecholamines by activation of your sympathetic nervous system. There's also activation of your RAS, and so the production of angiotensin 2, which is vasoconstrictor, as well as the release of endothelin. And these are the compensatory response, some of the compensatory responses to a decrease in the cardiac output. So the pharmacologic intervention is through the giving of arteriolar vasodilators as exemplified by your ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers. Now, in heart failure, eventually contractility is reduced, no, because you have progressively weakening heart, no. So there's a reduced intrinsic contractility and reduced rate of myocardial shortening and reduced rate of intraventricular pressure development. And so this is the setting where we can give your inotropic agents as exemplified by digoxin, which is an example of your cardiac glycosides. And then again, this is a compensatory response. The increase in sympathetic nervous outflow will cause an increase in heart rate, no? Because norepinephrine is a cardiac stimulant. So you have activation of your cardiac beta receptors, no? And this will reduce diastolic filling time as well as coronary perfusion pag mabilis yung heart rate. So how do you address this? No? This is where your beta blockers will have a place in the treatment. So here, if you look at this diagram, you will notice that a lot of these drugs are already familiar to you. No? So we will now discuss them one by one in the context of treatment of chronic and acute heart failure. No? So the drugs that are used are grouped into two. No? These are the drugs that do not have a positive inotropic effect. No? So they do not have they do not produce increase in cardiac contractility. No? And this group of drugs are actually the first line agents for heart failure. No? This is exemplified by diuretics, your ARBs and ACE inhibitors, no? Vasodilators, and your beta blockers. And then group 2 will be the drugs which have positive inotropic effects. So this is where your digoxin belongs to, no? Cardiac glycosides, bipyridines, and beta adrenergic agonists like dobutamine and dopamine. So we'll go through them one by one. The diuretics are the first line or cornerstone management in heart failure, especially the loop diuretics, no? Such as furosemide. And they reduce salt and water retention, and so they reduce venous pressure and preload. And this will result to a relief of congestive symptoms or symptoms of volume overload. No? So as mentioned, the diuretics do not have a direct contractile effect on the myocardium. But because of their mechanism of action, heart size is reduced, and therefore cardiac function is reduced. No? It's improved. No? Kasi the reduce in heart size will reduce myocardial oxygen demand. Now, The potassium sparers, if you recall, in the last part of the lecture on diuretics, there are some potassium sparers like spironolactone and eplerenone. These are the diuretics which can oppose the effect of aldosterone, have actually improved survival rate of patients with severe heart failure if these are added to regimens containing ACE inhibitors. Now, the ACE inhibitors and the close related ARBs are drugs that can reduce the afterload. So they diminish, these are arteriolar vasodilators, so they diminish peripheral vascular resistance. So these agents will oppose or reverse the effects of RAS stimulation, such as vasoconstriction. But they also, by opposing RAS, they can also prevent salt and water retention. And this latter effect will contribute to a decrease in preload. So the primary effect will be a decrease in afterload, but eventually, by also preventing salt and water retention through opposition of RAS, they also eventually help in the reduction of preload. So the use of these agents will lower angiotensin levels, and this will reduce in turn sympathetic activity and the release of norepinephrine. So these agents will reduce cardiac remodeling because the release of catecholamines from sympathetic stimulation actually produces early apoptosis and favors remodeling. So this is the advantage of the ACE inhibitors and ARBs. They have the ability to counter that effect of the sympathetic nervous system. So this is probably one of the reasons why heart failure patients have better prognosis when they're receiving these agents because of the reduction in cardiac remodeling. Now, this is just a diagram to reiterate what we mentioned earlier. So you see, this is the spectrum of cardiac remodeling. So as we mentioned, initially, the initial adaptation, which is hypertrophy, will lead to an augmentation in the cardiac output. So this is the initial response of the failing heart. But eventually, your hypertrophied heart will require more oxygen. So there's an increase in the myocardial oxygen demand, which cannot, of course, be eventually met by the system. So eventually, there is an escalation of the changes. So you have a beginning dilatation, and a decrease in the left ventricular wall and an increase in the left ventricular chamber. So you now have dilatation. And this is the progression of what we call cardiac remodeling. The dilatation is also due to increased cell death or early cell death of the cardiac myocytes, especially because of the effect of elevated norepinephrine from sympathetic nervous system activation. So eventually, patients will have dilatation of the cardiac chambers and further progression of weakening of the heart. So the vasodilators will benefit patients with heart failure because they can reduce preload and or afterload. For example, isosarbide dinitrate and hydralazine will produce these effects. But at the same time, these two prototypes will be advantageous because they have also shown to reduce cardiac remodeling. The venodilators, such as nitroglycerin, which are often combined with diuretics for congestive symptoms, no? And this is exemplified by nitroglycerin. So nitroglycerin will act by dilating the veins or the capacitance vessels, no? And this will reduce venous return and reduce preload. No? So by reducing venous return, the left ventricular chamber volume is reduced and left ventricular diastolic pressure is reduced, and this reduces the myocardial oxygen demand. Okay, your beta blockers, we have to be careful, no? Because as you may recall, beta blockers are cardiac depressants, right? They have negative chronotropic and inotropic effect. So beta blockers have the potential to actually trigger acute decompensation. However, judicious and early inclusion of some of the beta blocker prototypes in chronic stable heart failure have been shown to improve prognosis in patients with chronic heart failure. And these are the prototypes shown in the screen: bisoprolol, metoprolol, carvedilol, and nebivolol. And the reason why they have this beneficial effect is because they counter the effect of elevated catecholamines, which, as we mentioned earlier, elevated catecholamines, elevated norepinephrines from sympathetic nervous system activation will promote early apoptosis of cardiac myocytes and will promote cardiac remodeling. So these agents will oppose those changes, and this is the reason why they can improve prognosis. Now, this is a relatively new drug, ivabradine. Ivabradine is a blocker of what you call your hyperpolarization activated cyclic nucleotide gated channel, or the HCN channel, which is located in the pacemaker cells of the sinoatrial node. So by blocking these agents, your ivabradine will exert a lowering of the heart rate. So by lowering the heart rate, it reduces diastolic depolarization and myocardial oxygen demand. And slower heart rate will increase the time for myocardial perfusion. But what is good about ivabradine compared to the beta blockers is that it does not affect the force of contraction. So it will not precipitate further weakening of the failing heart. Now, we go to the group 2 agents, agents that have a positive inotropic effect. And one of these will be your cardiac glycosides, as exemplified by digoxin. This is derived from the white foxglove plant, or Digitalis lanata. It has an oral absorption of 65 to 80%. It has wide distribution in the body, including the CNS. It is metabolized both. It is metabolized partly, but a significant portion is excreted unchanged in the kidneys. And the amount that is excreted unchanged is dependent on kidney function. So dependent on creatinine clearance. So normally, so we usually adjust the dose in the setting of renal disease. No? The half-life of digoxin is about 36 to 40 hours. Now, please remember that digoxin has a narrow therapeutic index. No? It has several beneficial effects, but considerable toxic effects as well, both in the cardiovascular system and in non-cardiac tissues as well. No? And this will be partly because of the ability of these drugs like digoxin to inhibit the sodium-potassium ATPase pump or the sodium pump. So this is the main mechanism by which it exerts its positive inotropic effect. No? But this may also be the underlying mechanism for some of the toxicities. So that is what is known about digoxin. And because of its narrow therapeutic index, it's not a first-line agent anymore. And there are safer and newer inotropes that are also available in the market. So this slide will show you the mechanism of the positive inotropy effects of digoxin. No? With the pump inhibition, free calcium levels rise near the area of the contractile proteins during systole. So this is the one that produces positive inotropic effects. Then the sodium calcium exchanger reduces calcium efflux. So it reduces the amount of calcium that leaves the cell. And this will contribute to a further increase in intracellular calcium. No? The calcium is then sequestered by the circa of the sarcoplasmic reticulum for subsequent release, no, during contraction. So the positive inotropy, however, is also modified by the cardiovascular responses and the mechanisms of heart failure. So there is a regulation of the degree of the effect of digoxin on cardiac inotropy will also be dependent on how the heart responds and what heart failure mechanisms are already operative. Now, there are two digitalis or such as digoxin will also have a positive chronotropic effect. So they can also increase heart failure, heart rate, no? And this can be done in two ways. So there are two ways by which the drug will affect conduction. Now, one way is the direct effect on the cell membrane. So there's said to be an initial brief early prolongation of the action potential, followed by its shortening, especially of the plateau phase. No? So the shortening of the action potential is because of the egress of potassium from the cell, which is triggered by the increase in intracellular calcium. So this effect is seen in the therapeutic range of digoxin. But as the dose approaches the supratherapeutic level, so as it approaches the toxic levels, the resting membrane potential becomes less negative, no? So parang mas natitrigger yung mas madali ngayon ma-reach yung threshold of firing, no? Because the potential becomes less negative. And this is because the sodium pump is inhibited, no? And intracellular potassium will fall. As the intracellular sodium increases, delayed after depolarizations will begin to appear. No? So you will have ectopic beats or what we call premature depolarization. And this can rapidly escalate into tachycardia and a full-blown fibrillation, which can, of course, be severe and fatal, no? Especially if the arrhythmia will occur in the ventricles. Now, the second way is through its effect on the autonomic nervous system. And this effect is dose dependent. No? So at low doses, the predominant effect of digoxin is cardioselective parasympathetic effects. No? So baroreceptors are said to be sensitized and there is a central vagal stimulation. No? But since there are more vagal nerve endings in the atrial tissue, this effect of digoxin will be more on the atrium than the ventricles. No? But as toxic doses are approached, no, sympathetic stimulation will set in. No? And although this is said not to directly produce the toxicity, this increase in sympathetic nervous outflow will make the heart more sensitive to digitalis toxicity, especially make the heart more sensitive to the arrhythmogenic effect of digoxin. Now, here are the other effects on extracardiac tissues, the most common of which will center on the gastrointestinal tract. No? So you can have nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea and anorexia also. No? Now, take note that the GIT manifestations may be rapidly followed by arrhythmia. So you have to be cognizant of this fact that when you know that a person is on digoxin therapy and complains or manifests with GIT symptoms, no, you have to reevaluate as soon as possible because you may need to discontinue or lower the dose of the drug because arrhythmias can set in very fast. No? Then on the right side are less common extracardiac effects like visual disturbances, color changes, color perception changes. No? In males, they can develop gynecomastia, and especially in the elderly, they can have complaints of hallucinations and disorientation. Digoxin will also affect levels of certain electrolytes, and this can be very critical, especially when we talk about potassium. No? Please recall that digitalis and potassium will inhibit each other's binding to the sodium pump. No? So therefore, when you have increased potassium, no, you have less room for digitalis to inhibit the pump. So this will weaken the digitalis inhibition of your sodium-potassium ATPase pump. No? So, in fact, hyperkalemia can reduce cardiac automaticity and they can moderate elevations of extracellular potassium, and this can help counter or resolve digitalis toxicity. No? Now, so the low potassium will have the reverse effect. With low potassium, you'll have more room for digitalis to bind and inhibit the sodium ATPase pump. Now, increased intracellular calcium will enhance digitalis-induced abnormal automaticity and arrhythmogenicity, while increased magnesium will have the opposite effects. So knowing all of these potential effects on digitalis toxicity, these are closely monitored while on therapy with this agent. Now, a relatively newer inotrope will be milrinone. This is the prototype of bipyridines. Milrinone is a phosphodiesterase isozyme 3 or PD3 inhibitor. No? This is an IV drug with a half-life of about 3 hours, and 10 to 40% of it is excreted through the kidneys. No? Now, this drug will increase calcium efflux during the action potential, and this will also cause vasodilation. No? So, by inhibiting PDE3, milrinone will increase cyclic AMP. No? And this is will lead to, and this will also increase nitric oxide. So, you have both inotropism and vasodilatation. So milrinone has been used in acute heart failure or acute episodes of decompensation in patients with chronic heart failure. It is also arrhythmogenic, so we're also careful in its dosing because this is dose-related. And uncommon adverse effects will be bone marrow dysfunction and hepatotoxicity. Now, drugs like dobutamine are prototypes of your beta adrenoceptor agonist. This is also an IV drug that is given by intermittent infusion in management of heart failure. So dobutamine can increase cardiac output and lower ventricular filling pressure. But remember that being a selective beta-1 agonist, this can cause tachycardia. And when you have tachycardia, of course, this increases myocardial oxygen demand, and this can precipitate angina and arrhythmias in heart failure patients with underlying coronary artery disease. Now, the other disadvantage is you can develop waning effect with the continuous use of the glutamine. So, because it can produce tachyphylaxis. Dopamine is another prototype, and this is used in heart failure, in acute heart failure, when there is no need to increase blood pressure. So, this again is a relatively new drug. This is these are your this is your neprilysin inhibitor, and the known prototype currently is sacubitril. No? So neprilysin is an enzyme which is responsible for the degradation of your natriuretic peptides, no, like ANP and BNP, for the degradation of angiotensin 2 and bradykinin. So the giving of inhibitors like sacubitril may be beneficial in the setting of heart failure. And this is marketed as a combined formulation with valsartan and has been used for heart failure cases wherein you already have reduced ejection fraction. Okay. Now, I think I included in the manual some of the treatment guidelines for heart failure, no? So, also the recommended strategies based on the stages or the classes of heart failure, no? So, many protocols, most protocols, if not all, will recommend that control of risk factors will be the first step for patients in early or lower stages of heart failure, like stage A and B. And active management for failure is initiated at stage C. Now, sodium removal is extremely beneficial for patients with heart failure. This is also beneficial for hypertension, as we mentioned. in the previous lecture, no? And so this works in conjunction with the diuretics in terms of improving preload, no? And sodium removal will also help prevent the development of hypokalemia, no? So it is an adjunct that we advise to patients who are on ACE. This is also an advice that we give as well as adding ACE inhibitors or a potassium-sparing diuretic like spironolactone, especially if the patient is on loop diuretics or thiazide diuretics. So your RAS modulators, like your ACE inhibitors and your ARBs, we mentioned that this is the first line drug, no? If there is left ventricular dysfunction, but you don't have any signs of congestion, no? And we know that they can reduce afterload, no? And eventually preload, and it slows down heart failure progression, no? So these are arteriolar vasodilators, as we said, no? Because of its action of opposing RAS effects, no? So you do not produce by inhibiting the enzyme or blocking angiotensin, you inhibit the effect of this potent vasoconstrictor. But secondarily, because they oppose RAS activation, you also do not retain salt and water. So this is the reason why eventually preload is also reduced by these agents. No? Now, however, one of the treatment guidelines is this. No? ACE inhibitors is not a replacement for digoxin if the patient is already on digoxin maintenance. No? Because the one reason why digoxin is included in the regimen is that the heart failure may be in a state in which you already have a weakened heart, no? And so it is important that you have an inotrope that will help maintain cardiac output. And therefore, if you remove the inotrope like the digoxin and replace it with ACE inhibitors, this can lead to deterioration of your patients. No? Now, ARBs are a good replacement with the same benefits if the patients will complain of chronic cough from bradykinin stimulation from ACE inhibitors. No? Okay. Now, what about the vasodilators? So when we decide on whether or not to give a vasodilator will depend on the hemodynamic parameters and the overall condition of the patient. And in the selection of what type of dilator that we need to give. No? For example, if the main problem in the patient is a high feeling pressure coupled with dyspnea, no? So it means that you have congestion. A venous dilator will be helpful, like your long-acting nitrates. If the main problem is a low ventricular output, so that your patients complain of easy fatigability, no? Because the cardiac output is not enough to sustain oxygenation of body tissues, no? So madaling nang mapagod yung pasyente. This is primarily an issue of increased afterload. So you can give an arteriolar dilator such as hydralazine. No? If you have severe chronic heart failure, which is unresponsive to therapy, you can give non-selective vasodilator, or you can give both an arterial plus a venodilator. Like, for example, you can give a regimen of hydralazine plus isosorbide dinitrate. Okay. The beta blockers is as I mentioned, we should be very, very careful because these are cardiac depressants. So we start with low doses, and the aim of therapy is really to oppose the detrimental effect of activation of sympathetic nervous system. No, you want to oppose the effects of high levels of catecholamines on inducing early cell death or of your myocytes and in inducing cardiac remodeling. No? So um, the giving of beta blockers will slightly increase ejection fraction, and it will slow heart rate, no? And the symptoms will gradually resolve after a few months. So you don't see an immediate beneficial effect. So if we are considering adding the beta blockers, we choose from the four prototypes, which was mentioned already, and this is highlighted. These are highlighted in the screen. Now, you notice that we have not discussed calcium channel blockers in the treatment of heart failure. No? So we usually we do not use calcium channel blockers in heart failure because they have profound cardiac depressant effects as well as profound effects in terms of slowing AV nodal conduction, and this can actually aggravate or trigger decompensation. No? So they can worsen symptoms of heart failure. That's why these are not included in the therapy. Now, in heart failure, the only acceptable glycoside currently will be digoxin. No? And this is used in heart failure and associated atrial fib if the first line agents are ineffective. So it means that ACE inhibitors and diuretics no longer work. That's what we mean, that if your patient is already on digoxin, no, it means that your ACE inhibitors are no longer effective. Okay? So we initiate therapy very, very slowly. This is the process which we call digitalization. No? Because remember that digoxin has a narrow therapeutic index. No? Okay. Now, so low doses is usually at 0.125 to 0.25 milligrams per day. That's the starting dose, and we slowly increase the dose based on the patient's response. Now, what is very helpful is to measure plasma digoxin levels, no, while the patient is on this medication, because as you remember, uh, having a narrow index, toxicities may manifest even before the benefits can kick in. No? So what you want is a target level, plasma level of less than or at most 1 nanogram per milliliter. No? Now, digoxin levels less than 9 nanograms per milliliter is associated with lower mortality than serum digoxin levels higher than these. No? Levels more than 1.5 nanograms per ml, however, already have high mortality rates. So ito yung target natin. Kaya tayo kaya importante ang nagmo-monitor ng plasma levels of digoxin. Now, the use of this inotroph has been shown to lessen hospitalization and death, no? But from heart failure progression, but ironically, it increases the risk for sudden death, usually due to arrhythmias. No? So as mentioned, because the therapeutic dose is narrow, and arrhythmias will be a significant danger, no? And so this has to be closely monitored. No? So your GIT symptoms and visual changes should signal dose reduction. And potential but not necessarily immediate discontinuation. Okay? So ito yung on the screen, this is the effect of digoxin. Now you have a curved ST segment depression. Okay? So aside from serum level monitoring, patients are also hooked to ECG. In severe digoxin toxicity, we sometimes see very high serum potassium levels, no? And this is because of mobilization from intracellular sites, no? So this equates to a depression in cardiac contractility. So in these cases, the giving of antiarrhythmics may be actually harmful rather than beneficial because antiarrhythmics can lead to arrest. No? So what is given is shown in the right side. So in severe toxicities, that's a time that we can give this digoxin immune antibody, no? IGF antibody. No? And your Fab fragments, they call it. And aside from this, the patient will often require a temporary pacemaker. Now, in diastolic heart failure, these are for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Of the beta blocker treatment, the best will be nebivolol. And in this setting, we control the underlying associated morbidity, which is usually hypertension and dyslipidemia. Now, if the patient also has significant coronary artery disease, then this is the time that we can recommend revascularization procedures. So we can refer them for possible angioplasty, no, or PCI. We also give ACE inhibitors or ARBs, and if there are associated atrial fibrillation, we also need to control the arrhythmia. Now, ivabradine is a very useful bradycardic agent because it can improve by reducing heart rate, as we mentioned, it can improve the time for diastolic filling. So you have more blood to pump out. And it can also importantly increase the time for myocardial perfusion. So this is the benefit of ivabradine, especially because ivabradine does not depress or weaken cardiac contractility. For acute decompensation episodes, this is characteristic of chronic heart failure. No? So chronic heart failure patients may have episodes of this, no? And as we mentioned early on, this may be because of various factors or precipitating events. No? So if the acute acute failures due to MI, then this is an indication for emergency revascularization or thrombolytic therapy. So we need to prevent thromboembolism. So anticoagulant, antithrombolytic therapy is also indicated. No? For the management of congestive symptoms or symptoms of overload, then of course the first line will be IV therapy with furosemide, and then we can add your positive inotropes or your positive drugs with positive inotropic effect. We can give vasodilators, no? And we can give your aldosterone antagonist, no, for the treatment of hyponatremia. Okay, so that ends our lecture on cardiovascular agents. Thank you very much and have a nice day.